Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning or this afternoon for our second Visionary Voices. Before we get started, I want to take a moment and thank our sponsor for this event, First Business Bank. First Business Bank has been a great partner to ATSA in helping us with our financials and investments. And they're also now partnering with our chapters. So if you are a chapter leader or would like to learn more about this for your chapter, please feel free to shoot me an email and we'll get you connected. So thank you to First Business Bank again. Really excited to have you all here today for April and Sexual Assault Awareness Month to talk with Franca Cortoni about her work and her career and dive into this. So we'll do a little intro for Franca, not that she needs any. Franca Cortoni received her doctorate in clinical and forensic psychology from Queen's University at Kingston, Ontario, Canada. Since 1989, she has worked with and conducted research on female and male sexual offenders. In 2007, after many years with Correctional Services Canada, she moved to the School of Criminology at the Université de Montréal, where she is professor of criminological psychology. She is also a research fellow at the International Center of Comparative Criminology. Her research focuses on the factors associated with the development of sexual offending behavior, risk assessment, and treatment of both male and female sexual offenders. She has published extensively on these issues, and she was also the 2018-19 president of the Association for the Treatment and Prevention of Sexual Abuse. As we welcome Franca to our conversation, please feel free to go ahead and comment in the chat. Anise is helping out today with the chat, and we'll make sure to send any questions my way that come up if we miss them. Welcome, Franca. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Amber. Thank you for having me.
I always love to start these conversations out, always the second one, by asking, how does it feel to be a visionary voice?
I've had to get used to the fact that I'm no longer young and that I've been around for a while. It hit me a few years ago, so I think I'm okay with it now. But I must admit, it was when you wrote me and asked me to be the second one in this series after Carl Hansen. I guess it's an affirmation that people appreciate the work that I've done all these years, and the passion I've had. People know that the passion I've had about this field and what I've done and why we do this work, and the fact that it's been recognized that way, to me, it's very, very rewarding. So I appreciate that.
Franca, I think passion is such a great word to describe you. And I think anybody who knows you even a little bit would know that you are very passionate about this work. Where does that passion stem from?
Well, I think there's a couple elements. I think it's just me naturally, who I am. Whatever I do, I tend not to do it halfway. I tend to go all the way. My mother used to say all the time, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing well. So it's like, okay, Mom, I got the lesson. But also, I think it's the whole idea since I was a kid, I was always interested in things that were deviant, right? Not just standardized, standard ways of looking at the world and whatnot. And, human beings always interested me. And then I discovered this whole field of forensic psychology. And then within that field, the whole issue of sexual offending. And it was like, well, why would people take something that is so good as sex, when sex is good, it's bloody good. I think we can all agree to that, and turn it into something so harmful, right? And I think this is where I started looking into it, and the more I delved into it, the more I became fascinated with this whole field and tried to understand, again, going back to wanting to know how people function, and then coupling that with this whole interest and trying to understand why people want to harm somebody else and using this way to harm somebody else. It all stemmed from there. And it just stayed my entire career. And it still is, you know what I mean? Like, it's not hasn't gone away. I'm not done. I still have a lot of work to do, and this field is still a lot of answers. I wish I had more time. Sometimes I wish I had another career yet in front of me because of what I've learned over the years and what I can see, where this still needs to go and where it can go. But, it is what it is. So I have to trust that the next generations behind are just as gung-ho as some of them. And I know some of them really are. And wanting to pursue and further advance the field, right?
So speaking of that next generation, ATSA's long been invested in students and getting them invested in this field. What advice would you give students who are just starting out?
Oh, well, not surprising. It wouldn't be a surprise. I would say, don't be afraid to be passionate. I think sometimes there's a lot of pressure on us, and there's a lot of, and I mean us, just generally people in general, and you got to follow some tracks, you got to do certain things, whatnot, and sometimes I've seen students over the years, they follow the track because they think, oh, this is so exciting, but then they're afraid when they realize it's not really their field, they're afraid to step back out of it. And then some of them stay, and I've seen people that become professionals and then they stay in the field because they feel kind of an obligation. And I think that's not good. It's not good for anyone, including the students themselves. But if you discover that passion and don't be afraid to pursue it, and don't be afraid to challenge your professors. And that's a big one. And that's a very big one. But don't be afraid to challenge your professors. Those of you who are the students, maybe you are here, the next generation that are still at school and working on that. And if you're a young professional in this field, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to try out new things. Don't be afraid to challenge the established knowledge and say, okay, this doesn't feel right. This does not sound right. Where else can I take this? And the reason I'm saying that, it's because that's how the field grows. That's how new science develops. That's how new knowledge gets established. It's not the profs, like me, I've got my ways of thinking. Like I said a moment ago, I can see where things can go, but I don't have all the answers. And having a fresh mind coming along and having a new way of looking at it, it just opens up so many doors. And just this is the way, this is how things advance. So don't be afraid and be passionate.
Great advice. I remember when I was first starting, I came from victim services, so I knew a lot about sexual violence, but not a lot about treatment of sexual
Right.
violence. One of the questions I asked you from a victim services perspective was, okay, so we know recidivism is low if there's treatment, but what about the people we don't know about? And your response to me, which I remember, which you may not, was, well, we know what we know.
Yeah.
How would you respond? How do you explain that to people who ask that question?
Uh, well, I do. I have to say this is the reality. We're not going to pretend we have all the answers, because we simply don't, right? But I know we know a lot more today than we did when I started in this field, like about 30 years ago. There's a lot of changes that's been, and so I think this is important. And sometimes I just make the parallel with medical science. This is 30 years ago, we didn't know, the medical field didn't know how to treat, for example, certain cancers. And today they're routinely cured without any question, right? It's no longer that automatic death sentence. And it's just the same for what we do. It'd be great to say, hey, I got a pill, we're going to fix it. You take treatment, no worries, no problem. That's not how life works, right? That's why this is why it's so important to continue researching and not just giving up, because we are a lot better at what we're doing. We have learned a lot more and we are understanding better, but we don't have all the answers yet. And we are dealing with human beings. And when we deal with human beings, it's very difficult. And I don't think we can ever get all the answers, for example, but we can get much better at it.
So when we're thinking about that research, what role should ATSA, if any, have in identifying the gaps in research and calling for more research?
That's an interesting question. I think ATSA has a couple roles in that. One, which it does really well already through the conference, for example, and the seminars and all that are going on now, is sharing the information, going to the source of the people who produce those research, and then getting them to share it so that researchers, students, and clinicians alike start getting some ideas of what's going on and the new ways of thinking, or where are we going. Sometimes I know from all the ATSA conferences I've talked to, clinicians go, yeah, but I don't quite get it. How do I use this? Says, but be patient. We're going to continue working on this. Just be aware that there's new stuff coming out, and then think about it, and just let your mind open up a little bit, and then see what you can do with that. So I think this is something that ATSA has done very, very well all along. The other thing they've done really well was, encouraging the students, the next generation, and then with all the awards and, the emphasis on students. The other part, I think, and sometimes, and I know it's been attempted in the past, and there's no real straight answers, but it's finding a ways for clinicians, because I worked as clinicians for many years before I went on to be a program director and then move on to the academic world. Clinicians observe a lot of things that don't quite fit with what the research says. And I think there's a forum somewhere, and I don't have a clear answer how this could be done, but a forum somewhere through ATSA where ideas from clinicians, this is what I've observed. Anybody knows anything about this? And it's not just like the listserv where people asking questions about help me with this case, more just in terms of where can we go with this? Should this go somewhere? Is this within that kind of context? I'm not sure if that makes sense what I'm saying right now,
Yep,
but
it makes perfect sense. The connection between research and clinicians.
So yeah, and I know it's been tried in the past. I know when Carl was the chair of the research committee, moons ago, he attempted with having the clinician, the data dating service. We called it back then. I was on the research committee back then, where clinicians had data and then researchers, trying to meet up, through it's through ATSA, but it never really went somewhere, and I'm not sure why. What didn't work, within that kind of context. But so I think this is the part, if there's a way in there that connecting exactly the clinicians who have those ideas with the researchers, because as researchers we can get pretty stuck in the way we're doing our things, because we've got ideas and we want to explore them and all that, but we always have students that have ideas or want fresh ideas, and then communicating and connecting with the clinicians, I think, could be something really great.
What would you say to clinicians who are facing things that are new at a rapid pace? AI would be a great example, right? And there's not a strong evidence base to treat from. What would you tell them?
Oh boy. AI, I don't know if you know, but Montreal, my university, has a major AI research center, and the head of that is one of the top in the world in AI. And all we get is bombarded with, be careful, this is going to take over the world, all the doomsday things.
Yes.
So, so I, I get that all the time. I think I don't really have any good answers, I'll be honest with you, regarding AI. I'm struggling with it myself. I've played around a little bit with it. I think the universities are struggling with it, about how to use it in a way that makes sense. And until, there's a better system in place, I think for clinicians who want to use AI and to find ways of doing things, I think you have to be really careful. And this is, you can read what they say, but then go back to the original sources. Go read the original sources as much as you can. And I know as clinicians, there's one, you don't have a lot of time because you're working so hard doing the clinical work. And two, you may not feel well versed or enough to start reading all these research papers with all the, complicated statistics and all that kind of stuff. But, you can still scan, read the intro, look at the results, and then read the discussion, and, and then see who the authors are, and then try to understand where this is being published, and then go to the conferences and talk with other people, communicate with other people. Because I think AI is an interesting tool, but it has lots of potential for negativity, like I said, but I'm in it's right in my building, you know what I mean? So I think, not quite my building, but it's right in my university, all these warnings about AI. So yeah.
Thank you. That's awesome. So you said it earlier, and I've always been fascinated by it. How did you go from practicing, being a clinician, to being a director, to academia and research and book writing? Tell us about that journey.
Um, ironically, is I never wanted to be a clinician. So when I was in undergrad, I was interested in psychology, human beings. I want to study human beings. I want to understand it. Then, like I said, I discovered the forensic psychology field when I was in undergrad, and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I needed to take a class to fill in my schedule, as we do when we're in undergrad. And I had to take some 3 credits in a psychology in this block. And I was like, introduction to clinical psychology. Okay, whatever, I'll take that. And it turned out that I just loved it. And this is what I remember. My prof was an adjunct professor. He was a clinician, and I just loved it. I just could see how the research was translated and applied, but I could see also where there were holes in the whole thing that they were talking about. I already had questions about that. And because then I decided to go on to grad school. Actually, I didn't decide. I had a couple profs who strongly encouraged me to go to grad school. I decided to pick through clinical, going through the clinical stream, because I realized that if I learned better about people and working with people, it would probably inform my research better. And it's exactly what happened. And I've always wanted to do that research. And I've always kept doing that research, right from my honors thesis in undergrad, my master's thesis, and then my PhD dissertation. I've always had my finger in research, even when I work as a clinician. So, didn't have time to publish an awful lot, but I gave talks to conferences using the clinical data I had access to when I was working as a clinician, and just kept going through that. But then at some point, I've always known, even from those days, that I was not going to remain in clinical work for the rest of my life. Don't ask me why, but I've always known that. Like I knew I needed to do it. I needed the expression I've used more than once is I wanted to know what sex offenders ate for breakfast. Right, if that makes sense.
Yep.
That's how I wanted to know how they function in reality, not just what the research says, the books, group data. I wanted to have that experience. And it was invaluable for me because it actually informed so much of my research that I've done over time. And then I moved on because I needed to move out of the clinical work and then just refocus. And I had the opportunity to become program director, which didn't last very long, I'll be honest with you. And then I was able to move on, in Corrections Canada as director of research. And then I was back to my research. And from there, University of Montreal said, hey, we'd like to have you, you're interested. And, you do your soul searching and then you do the switch. And the rest is history because I've been there 17 years already at the University of Montreal. So.
That's fascinating. And it also leads me to this question of what made you decide that you were going to start researching women who sexually offend?
Oh, another good question. Well, again, back in the 1990s, as I was going through grad school, working my PhD, but I started working clinically. And, everybody knows I'm Francophone, first language. And in Kingston at the day was the only federal prison in Canada. And in Canada, we have a 2-tier prison system. So provincial, so equivalent to a state system. Provincial is less than 2 years incarceration, and probation on that. Anything that is sentenced that starts at 2 years all the way to life, etc. That's the federal system. So it's different in the sense that it's not tied to federal jurisdiction. It's just a federal system. So it's the same prison system across Canada. And back in the 1990s, there was only one federal prison for women, which was located in Kingston. Kingston was the hub of the federal prisons in Canada. So I worked in several of those federal penitentiaries with sex offenders, but they needed a Francophone psychologist to work with the Francophone women that were incarcerated there from Quebec. And that was it. So I started working with the women. And then I'm working with male sex offenders. And then I'm looking at the women and I'm going, well, there's women that are violent. There's women that commit murder like the man, always to a much lower base rate, if you want. And then it's like, okay, well, there has to be women who commit sexual offenses. And it turned out there was one, and then a second one in there. And I started looking around in the literature back in the 1990s, and all that I saw was that, they're poor victims. They're either mentally ill or they're victims of men who forced them to sexually offend, because they were in fear of their lives, whatnot, which always struck me as a bit weird. But basically I says, okay, well, whatever. And women offenders being victims was something I heard a lot in those days, in the 1990s. Fast forward when I went to Ottawa National Headquarters for Corrections Canada, and we had a very infamous case, the Carla Homolka, Paul Bernardo cases, which, you know, back to the 1990s, they had kidnapped some couple teenagers at different times, kept them as sexual slaves, and then killed them. And she ended up going to the police, saying she was forced by him. She got a deal with the prosecutor, 12 years in prison against, you know, the exchange for her testimony against him, incarcerated. She's getting out of prison, and they needed somebody to handle this whole issue from a media point of view, and the female sex offender files for Corrections Canada. And basically, I was the only person around that was a sex offender specialist and had worked at the prison and would for women and with women offenders. And that's how I ended up going back into that. And then I just started reading back into it, and I started looking again into that. And Carl, we worked in the same building, different divisions of, you know, Public Safety Canada, but we start talking, and from there we start looking at recidivism rates or those kind of things. And you know, the more I delve back into it, the more I start understanding that women are not men. It was very, very difficult to do that shift. And some people in the audience may have heard me talk about that. As I always say, you just take your male sex offender hat and then pick up the female sex offender hat and put it on, because they're not the same thing. And again, it's that intellectual curiosity, that wanting to know more, that got me going and really kind of digging into it, and then understanding. But also because of victims coming to me. Some of them, one of them actually showed up at an ATSA conference and came to my paper, and I kind of got an earful from her, from, you know, and I started understanding as well the importance of not neglecting that, because the whole point of doing this work at the end of the day is to prevent victimization, is to prevent sexual abuse, right? This is why we do this work. This is why I do the work, right? This is why, the reason why I've always done this work. And then realizing that basically victims of women were second-class victims, you know, because they didn't have, you know, the luck of being assaulted by a man where everybody's going to accept her and say, oh, poor you, and support her and everything else. Instead, this is, my mother did this woman did this. It's like, are you sure you're not mistaken? Because, you know, of course, we all know that, you know, people mistake being sexually abused, right? And then I realized that there was a whole class of victims that are completely being ignored by us. You know, those of us who pretended we're doing this work in order to prevent sexual abuse, we're ignoring a whole class of victims, because we felt that the women were not a problem, and that the problem were men, and that those who were offending, well, it's because they were mentally ill, they were a victim of men themselves, right? It's putting back the women back into the victim role again. And so this has really worked on why I'm doing this, but at the same time, like I said, it's also understanding that women are not men, so you can't just take the stuff we know on men and just apply it to these women. And so there's that passion of mine again, you know, about going, okay, we need to understand this better. I think we've made some progress. We still have a lot more to understand, but I think we've made some progress. And I think the field is much more understanding that you can't just do this male-based stuff and apply it to women.
Super interesting. And one of the things that you said makes me wonder, how do you explain to people that you do this work to prevent victimization?
Well,
there's a Franca answer coming. I can feel it.
yeah, I got kind of, right. It's just like, just tell them. It's like, you know, it's like, well, what do you want? Like, now what I do is if when it's out there, people who don't, they go, oh, you know, and it's okay. Well, look at it this way. It says, you know, we can work with victims. But when we only work with victims, we do nothing to solve the problems in the first place. And it's like, yeah, but, you know, we can just put these people in jail. We can, and we do. However, first of all, most of them will get out anyways, number one, but we haven't understood why they do it in the first place. And if we don't study those who do this, how are we going to understand how to prevent it in the first place? Because what we've been doing for too many years is teaching victims how not to get assaulted. So we're putting the responsibility on victims back. but it's actually on the offenders back, their responsibilities, or the wannabe offenders, or might become offenders, right? And I'm not saying that they all want to be, right? But all things happen, we know that they're not all equal, they're not all created the same. And we know some of them will drift into that for all kinds of reasons. Some of them are a little bit more psychopathic. There I say the word, and so we've got all kinds. But I think it's really, that's where we go and help people understand that you can't solve a problem by ignoring those who actually create the problem. And so this is what I do. This is how I go after it that way in order to prevent sexual abuse.
And in Franco fashion, you say that unapologetically.
Always.
Yes. One thing I've noticed since starting at ATSA is that sometimes we're apologetic about the work that we do, and I just don't think it serves us.
That's right.
We
I agree
should
with you.
be passionate and proud, and we're doing this to stop victimization.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, 100%. And I don't know if I really conveyed that when I was president of ATSA, but that was certainly something that to me, it's like, no, we're going to be loud and clear about what we do. And we're not going to be able to we can't be, as a result, afraid to challenge ourselves either, right? Because I think this is really important. We have to challenge ourselves, not become, set in our ways and we've got the answers and all this kind of stuff. No. Let's take a look constantly at what we do. Is this really good? Where's the research? Where's the data? Where are we going? What are we doing? Right? And let's not stay, and let's not stay in our little piece of the world. There's other people around the world that do the same work. And no, we don't have all the answers, and people have other ways of looking at it. And this is why it's important that we work together. We bring all these people together so that we can put all these minds together with different ways of looking, with different backgrounds. And this is how we're going to continue to advance this field. I've said it years ago to Carl. I remember we were in Germany at IATSO conference, and I turned to him listening to some students' talks from the Netherlands. And I turned to Carl and I says, you know what? I says, the next big stuff in this field, this is going to come from Europe, because we in North America are so stuck on risk assessment research. And not even a lot of treatment research. It's just taking it for granted that we know what to do for research, for treatment. But I says, in terms of advancing the field, looking at the things, this is the next stuff is going to come out. And my opinion, not so humble, but in my opinion, if you look at the stuff that the people in the Netherlands are doing right now, it is fantastic stuff. Even in relation to risk, the dynamic networks, those elements are saying this is fantastic work. That's just pushing us to a new direction and start, getting those boundaries out and start thinking in different ways. The stuff they do, even relating to, the sexual arousal issues, all the work that Winnicke Smith, for example, is doing in there is just fantastic. So so this is one message: pay attention to what they're doing in Europe. They're doing some really good stuff that's helping us advance the field. Yeah.
I know something that you are extremely passionate about is that this field be international.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
It means looking at the world as human beings that can all be together, as opposed to looking at each our little country and a little piece of the world and thinking we're better than all the others because we happen to be in North America, or because we happen to be in Canada, or, and all that. It's about, again, it goes back to why, my initial passion, or why I eventually ended up in this thing about human beings, right? And connecting with other human beings, and being able to connect with people from other countries. I've been privileged. I mean, I've been to so many different countries working. I was just in Thailand last fall, which was amazing, helping them understand, they have nothing. They're just starting out, right? But just talking with them and having those discussions with them, and then, learning about their culture, and then how they look at the world, and, what we can do together, and those kind of elements. And I think it's about utilizing everyone's resources, putting them together to move the film forward. Again, I go back, same old thing. Why do we do this work? We do it to prevent sexual harm. And if we're serious about it, then we have to be open, and we have to be open to what's out there, not just stay stuck in our own ways.
What would you say to people who are working in systems and are sort of forced into a way, but are interested in learning about all of these other ways of doing things, and they know that there is promise, but they're stuck in a system that's sort of mandating how they do it?
Yeah, I really feel for people that are stuck in those kind of situations. Oh, it's and I know because that's kind of why I left what I left in the past, right? Um, uh, I think it's try, if you can, try to find ways and not give up, you know, and getting the systems to change a little bit. It's very difficult to get systems to change. Um, you know, try to introduce whatever if you can. You know, the latest things, get them to send you to conferences and say, well, this is what I'm bringing back. You paid me to do this, right? So this is why I'm bringing back this new knowledge to you to help the system in that kind of context. Um, you know, just hopefully don't get discouraged. I think this is a big one. Try not to get discouraged. And if all else fails, you know, do you have other avenues, essentially? I think this is hard work, and it's not good if you do this hard work in an environment that is not supporting you. It's because you're going to burn out. It's not going to be good for you. And if it's not good for you, it's not going to be good for the people around you, for the people you love, and it's not going to be good for the people with whom you work.
I would just add on to that, that anybody who's in those places and needs support is always welcome to reach out to ATSA. We're happy to advocate on your behalf or give you resources or connect you with folks. So please always feel free to do that. Um, Franco, one thing you have said throughout this many times is to keep challenging yourself.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Ah, I think you have to be brutally honest with yourself, right? You know, people know me, they know I'm honest, you know, I'll see what I think, but I think they know I'm also honest with myself. It's not simple sometimes. And that means that you've got to be able to recognize that, no, you don't have all the answers. And, you know, sometimes you have to stop. And I'm not perfect, trust me, I'm far from perfect. But to be able to recognize, okay, I'm not stopping enough. I'm not paying attention enough. I'm not listening to others enough, for example. I'm looking after my own too much. This is my motives here. What are my motives? Why am I doing this in that kind of context? And I think this is it. I've done it for myself, but I think it's been really an eye opener when working with students that way as well, being able to, you know, let them challenge me, you know, but I challenge them too, though, and they know that. But and I challenge them, but I let them challenge me as well, you know, and I want them to challenge me, and I want them to win the discussion. So I push them so they get to that point as much as I can. With some I can't, and with some I have succeeded amazingly well. And you know, you know, it is what it is. But personally as well, sometimes it's taking that step back and go, okay, wait, you know, step back. You need to take a break here. You need to take a look at what's going on. You know what I mean? In this kind of context. So no one's perfect, and I'm far from perfect, trust me. But I think having developed, having shed the fear of being honest with myself, I think this is the key, you know, because it's hard to be honest with oneself, and I had to work really hard at that. And, you know, I managed to shed that fear at some point in my life. Not that I'm perfect, trust me again, you know, in that I still have fears or whatever, you know, and those kind of things. But I think having shed that fear, I think is what's helped me to be honest with myself, be honest with others, and to therefore keep an open mind as much as possible to talk but to also not be afraid to express myself, right? Because I spent a lot of time thinking about what I say. I don't just say things, right? I spent a lot of time before thinking about why I'm saying these things. And that, so, and I think this comes with time. I'll be honest with you. It's part of, you know, over the years, there's a process called aging. it sucks sometimes, but there's other good parts of it, to be honest with you. There's other good parts. It's the ability, I think, for me anyways, to be able to look back and then to see where I've been and where I am now, and yeah, like I said, to not be afraid, right? To have been able to become not afraid. Yeah.
So as you're looking back on your career, what are you most proud of?
Um, I don't think it's more of a more general thing. I'm really proud. It's not as much proud. I think it's more, I'm really happy that I got into a field that I was passionate about, and it turned out that I was good at it. Right. I didn't go into this field thinking I was going to be the best. I didn't go into this field thinking anything other than I wanted to study this field. And the fact that it turned out I was good at it, which meant that I was able to contribute in my own way to the advancement of the knowledge in this field. So somewhere along the way, I think that, basically, ultimately, I've helped work towards this goal of preventing sexual harm. I think this is what really is the key for me. That it turned out that way.
We were talking before you hopped on that you're a couple of months away from retiring from teaching and supervising students and all that good stuff. What are you most excited for as you look forward in your career?
Beside the fact that I'm going to take a break for a little while this summer, I'm going to continue to research. I think this is the big key. I must admit I'm a little tired, and I don't want to give up the field. I have a lot to do. I have, and many people know that I've been working on this international study to better understand the elements that contribute to the effectiveness of treatment for men. And pandemic happened, everything's screeched to a halt, but we're into currently right now we're piloting the program. We're piloting our methodology. I'm working with Michael Miner. This is great. And this is like where I want to be able to have the energy to continue that for several years, because this is a long haul project. It's not something that's going to be done in a couple of years. So being able to continue with that research and being able to continue with the research with the women as well. And there's books, my colleague and dear friend Robin Wilson, is on my case. It says, your last book on women is from 2018. It's 6 years now. Get an update out there. He says, I'll do that. I need to retire first. So I have time to do that. So it's that kind of stuff. So I'll be able to focus on the research and focus on the things that I still have to do, but while taking better care of myself, to be honest.
Several times throughout this chat, you've mentioned colleagues that you're working with.
Yeah.
If you were chatting with somebody just starting in this career or maybe a couple of years in,
Yeah.
what would you tell them about the importance of collaboration and connection to others in this field?
Oh my God, I tell my students that. I've told my students that so much all the time. Develop your network and go find the people. Go find the people from not just your age, your generation. Those a little bit above, those, way above, and then after that, there'll become some that will come after you. It says those networks are all important. Those connections are all important, because this is how you're going to be able to continue in this field. Because no matter how much you love the field, no matter how interested you are, there are moments that it's really, really tough. And you need to be able to have that support network, that not just that collaborative network, so you pull your ideas and you work together, but it's also at the personal level. Then you can count on these people as well. When you find the work is tough, and sometimes you wonder why you're doing this, you got those people you can talk to, because you've been there and they've been there and they understand what you're talking about. And this is as much for the researchers, but as for the clinicians as well. It is so crucial to have those connections. And it can be somebody at work with you, somebody in the field, but it's not in your place of work. You just talked about turn to ATSA, connect you with other people. It is so important. This is a tough field to be in. It's a very tough field to be in, whether we do it clinically, whether we do it even from a research point of view. And I've seen so many people become detached. They continue to do it by rote, you know. I've seen researchers, they do their stuff, but it's you know, they supervise the students, they do that kind of stuff, but there's no real passion left in there. There's no real much, and it's not doing the students a service. It's not helping those next generations. So it's about, to me, those networks, those connections from an intellectual point of view, from a professional point of view are crucial, but also from a personal point of view. And I think this is why I think ATSA serves, the ATSA conference in particular, has been so good, and many people know what I'm talking about, whether you're a clinician or researcher, is that one time a year going to that conference, and you know, that feel of reconnecting and feeling like you're with a group of people who know exactly what you're talking about, who understands, and you're reconnecting with these people. And it is so important. I think it just helps everyone in this field continue to move forward. And those who come to the conference for the first time, they're not like any other conferences. No, they're not. You know, I go to CPA, Canadian Psychological Association conference, great conference, people that I, you know, enjoy seeing, but it's such a huge conference, disconnected all over the place. But this is where everybody's there for the same stuff and for the same reasons. And it's part of what ATSA does so well, you know, to having that reconnection as part of that. And so this is an important element, and this is part of all that networking, which is crucial. There are people in Quebec I only see at the ATSA conference in the United States, you know. So it tells you how busy we get into our own little world, right? And yet we go to the conference and then we're reconnecting at the conference. So it's just as an example. Yeah.
We have one question from the audience, and that question is, what role do we as clinicians and researchers in this field have in informing and advancing public policy?
I think advancing public policy is a very, very difficult endeavor, whether you're a clinician, whether you're a researcher. I think we all wish we could do it, and sometimes it's very difficult. And when it is difficult, people may get discouraged. And so one aspect of that for me is try not to get discouraged, just a little bit at a time, a little bit at a time. Talking with people, you know, that networking, that everything else. Don't be afraid of talking to people a bit higher up, you know, just as things go and start moving along in the field. There's public policy changes at two levels. One is the grassroots level, it goes up, but then whether like it or not, at the top level. And so that's really important, who's at the top as well in that. I don't know that I've managed to influence a lot of public policy in my life, despite, you know, how I may have influenced the field. So I think I've influenced the field in terms of how clinicians work, you know, getting that. Maybe sometimes, you know, especially when it comes to the women, people have finally stopped, I think, to use male-based tools to assess risk in women, for example. I'm not so sure it's all over the place yet. It's a huge, you know, what they say, it's a small step, but a giant leap for mankind, whatever the expression is. You know, it doesn't seem like much, but every tiny little change we may make, whether it's your day-to-day workplace, you know, in terms of changing a little policy, every little thing we make, it's actually moving forward in the field, right? And once we move that step forward, the idea is, you know, not going back, right? And keeping to go. So like I said, I don't know that I've influenced public policy that much in my life, like the big public policies that much. But I know that a little bit at a time, you know, giving the messages starts making their way through. And I think sometimes if we get to do that, then we've done something major in that.
Perfect. Unless there are any other questions from the audience, my last question for you is, if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing in regards to that would help prevent sexual violence, what would you change?
Oh my God. Um, God, I wish there would be so much more prevention programs from the get-go, where all these people who have no chance in life, I'm not just talking about the kids who happen to be born in an environment, but even those parents, there's so much intergenerational issues, system issues, and all that, so that there be all the needed support system right across the board, I think would prevent so much crap, whether it's physical, sexual, emotional, right across the board, right? I think this would be, but man, oh man, you got to get those politicians on boards, and
Yeah.
those politicians are not interested. Why? Because they have 4-year terms, and
Yeah.
they want to get reelected, and that's their goal. But really, at the end of the day, if we want to move societies forward, it's really about working from the get-go and starting those ground level changes. If I had the magic wand, but if I truly had that kind of magic wand, then I'd say, let's solve all the problems, but I can't do that. So
You could only solve one problem with your wand.
okay, so self-sexual harm is like, yeah. I'm going to refer to Carl's interview, his
Yeah.
Visionary Voice interview, and he says for all children to grow up safe and happy, right? And I think that's true, but so
Yeah.
that these children grow up and don't become offenders themselves,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm just going to bore his words. I think he's listening right now. So sorry, Carl, I'm stealing your words. Yeah.
I was noticing that your answer was mirroring his. Your answer was systems focused, but it was the same. It mirrored his.
Yes.
So, question from Robin Goldman in the chat.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about your perspective on partnering with preventionists and victim advocates and even survivors to impact public perspective and policy about sexual perpetration?
Oh, that's a really good one, Robin. I think, wrongly or rightly, I think victims will have a lot more power in getting public policy changes than people like us, right? Because victims are the ones that, well, they're the victims, and society wants to protect victims. They finally come to the point, right? Most of them, not everybody, but where they recognize sexual abuse and they recognize victims of sexual abuse. And so the idea that victims can say, wait a minute, if you want to help us, this is what needs to happen. It's not just about services to us. It's about changing systems so that we help prevent sexual abuse in the first place. And this is what we know. And this is what we know because people are devoting their lives to learning this so that we can work together and do that. And so that, I think, is the way to go, honestly, in that kind of context. And I think this is one of the great things having you, because you worked in the victims field and now you're into this side of the business, and you're very, the other people have been as well, right? You just talked about the message went out about the Gelburns Award, right? The same kind of idea of joining, together, joining forces. We're always better when we're together, right? We're always stronger when we join forces together. And I think this is it's the way to go. Yeah.
Another question from one of our listeners. Hello, Franca from Belgium. This is Luca. According to you, what are the main future questions research should address in sexual offending, especially with women who have sexually abused? What could be the future steps?
Hi, Luca. I think with well, there's so many different things. I think we need both fundamental research, and this is for men or women, fundamental research, but we also need to improve that fundamental research, of course, to start understanding why things develop. Will also then help inform how we can best intervene. But I think when it comes to the women, one of the big things in this field that's happened for a long, long time is that women sexual offenders were compared to men sexual offenders. And it's like what I've been trying to get people to understand. No, you need to turn to the female offenders field. You need to understand what goes on in the female offending field in order to be able to put female sexual offending in perspective. It is not just a female version of male sexual offending. It is sexual offending is the same like when you have violent women versus violent men. The research is showing clearly there's not enough research yet on the women's side, whether the violent women, female sex offenders. But it's the idea to understand how they get there and then understanding, then comparing and understanding what's similar, what's what we call gender neutral, but what's gender specific, right? What's to male and what's to females, about how they get to that point. I've said it so many times, women are not men, right? And it's a default, the default is always men in our type of society. The medicine does that, the psychology has done that traditionally, criminology has done that traditionally, okay? It is what it is. It doesn't mean that it's acceptable. It doesn't mean that, we should continue and say, it is what it is. No, it's not, right? It's not right. And I think paying attention to these women, it's really important, but you got to really understand it from, understanding from the women offending literature, psychology, not, getting rid of that male-based stuff that I was talking about. The other thing is there has to be a better pooling of resources. I talked about network before. I talked about, being honest with oneself and all those things. And I says, it's natural to want to protect our little turf, right? I want to do this, but that's not how we advance the field, right? And we have to be able to take the data and pool it with other people who's got data and let, whatever things that prevents us from doing that, and then pulling it all together and moving forward. As a field, in order to understand, because we don't have a lot of data with these women. And we have some data, we're getting a little bit better data, but we need to have much more comprehensive data in each case from around many jurisdictions, from around the world, essentially, so that we can actually start pulling and have the meaningful kind of data that will allow us to do the kind of research that we still need to do to better understand why women got to the sexually offending behavior, how they got to that. And I don't know, but all the research indicates certainly that there's a lot more in common between women who sexually offend and women who violently offend than there are between women who sexually offend and men who sexually offend, right? And this is what I'm saying, this is what we need to do. This is one thing I've been wanting to do as well. Maybe I'll get there, I'm not giving up, but so yeah.
We'll keep an eye on you, Franca,
All
as
right.
always.
All right.
That is the end of our questions. I would just so very much like to thank you for taking this time today amidst a storm in Canada.
Yeah,
And,
yeah, I know. Yeah.
and joining us. We really appreciate all of your perspectives and everything that you do.
Yeah, well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks to the field, because I thank the field for finding my work interesting and helpful, because it's really rewarding. Like I said, I didn't start out because, I just started out in this field because it fascinated me. And like I said, it turned out that I was good at it. And it's thanks to the field, right? Because they've feed back to me as well. And from there I can take it and then, try to move forward. When I do things like training, for example, and I get the questions, it helps me think better and open up my mind. So it's a very much a give and take for me personally. I give, but I also take from the audiences, and it's so important to me because it helps me move forward in my thinking in that as well. So thank you to the field as well.
Well, thank you, Franca. Again, we appreciate you. As we sign off, I want to let everyone know about ATSA's next upcoming event. It's a webinar on Friday, February 26th on the impact of fetal alcohol syndrome on your treatment plans and what you might be missing as you think about that with sexual abuse. Great webinar coming up. Again, thank you to First Business Bank for sponsoring this series, and thank you to Franca.
Thank you very much.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.